The Life Sciences DNA podcast is sponsored by Agilicium Labs, a collaborative space where Agilicium works with its clients to co-develop and incubate POCs, products, and solutions. To learn how Agilicium Labs can use the power of its generative AI for life sciences analytics, visit them at labs.agilicium.com. Sri, we've got Kannan Natarajan on the show today. For people not familiar with Kannan, who is he?
Danny, Kannan Natarajan is Senior Vice President and Head of Data Sciences and Analytics at Pfizer. He's been part of Pfizer's research and development leadership team. He's a veteran from a pharma industry standpoint with over 30 years of experience and has worked across several therapeutic areas. Currently, he oversees clinical development strategy, data sciences, and statistical functional excellence across Pfizer's global portfolio.
And what are you hoping to hear from him today?
Kannan is an exciting guest on the show. He is a veteran from a pharma industry standpoint, but he's an innovator. He brings in lots of concepts from an AI perspective to actually implement it for pharma. The next, what I want to hear is he's actually implemented real-life use cases which have made a significant impact in clinical trial development.
Well, before we begin, I want to remind our audience they can stay up on the latest episodes of the Life Sciences DNA by hitting the subscribe button. If you enjoy this content, be sure to hit the like button and let us know your thoughts in the comments section. With that, let's welcome Kannan to the show.
Hi, Kannan. Welcome to the podcast. So excited to have you on the podcast. It'd be wonderful, Kannan, if you could start by telling about your AI journey. You've been at this for quite some time. You're a veteran here, so I'd love to hear your perspective on your journey.
First of all, Sri, thank you for having me actually in this podcast. It's truly an honor. The concept of actually use of artificial intelligence or machine learning, particularly in the pharmaceutical sciences and medicine development, is as much as actually we think that it has been there for quite some time. It is relatively new because pharma is a little late in terms of adoption to some of these nice tools. My journey actually started back in 2018 when at Pfizer, we were doing actually simple things like automation, robotic actually automation, and trying to actually to understand some simple things to continue to keep actually finding ways of bringing automation as much as possible. One of the event that we looked into is data reconciliation and ensuring that integrity of the data as we collect information across multiple data domains in clinical trials. We recognize that actually is very time consuming. So we started actually a whole concept called Smart Franchise. And one of them actually is called Smart Data Query, trying to actually to understand inconsistencies in data that is collected across multiple data domains. And how do you actually go about managing those inconsistencies and get a query out to the site as early as possible so that we can address some of those things. So I don't want to talk today actually about the smart thing because it is being talked at length in many forums. But that is when actually the journey started for me, where we started actually recognizing the power of concept of machine learning and then bring in actually some of these technological innovations in the pharmaceutical medicine.
I love the initiative SMART. I think it must be an umbrella term because you're doing multiple smart things. So tell me, how that journey of SMART happened and what are all the different umbrella use cases or things you have under that.
Yeah, there are plenty. And today probably I will not touch on many of those things because again, I have some interesting ones that particularly in the concept of GenAI was what I was more talking about because that's actually the next phase of thing which is that pharma is embracing. In the Smart franchise, we had, apart from Smart Data Query, we had Smart Coding, Smart medical dictionary actually assessment and things of that nature. So there were multiple of those examples that we had put in place where the use of actually AI or machine learning made a huge impact in time to actually automate some of these things. All of them are human augmentation, by the way. It doesn't replace humans. It just makes them more efficient. Because in health sciences, you have to actually find a way to augment the humans in making that thing. So that it made a huge impact. At least I can tell you the example that for us was the COVID vaccine program, where it made a huge impact in terms of the timelines, where we were able to deliver the COVID vaccine in a very record time, thanks to some of these innovations that we had put in place.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I think you hit upon a very important part of this AI journey, which is the human augmentation. And there's a change management in adoption. So give me a little bit of what was the kind of sense of people where there are a lot of trepidation and kind of like, I don't want this, to how did you convert that journey to adoption? It'll be great to see how people went from skeptics to adopters to users to making an impact.
Yeah, I think actually we have to recognize none of these are black box tools that actually just out of the box, you take it out and then all of a sudden it actually comes up with some miracle solution. It is an iterative tool. The concept of machine learning is, as any good statistician or a data analytics person will tell you, is that this is a model. It's based on model, and the model actually only gets better on an iterative basis. You need to actually continue to have the right model in the first place, validate the model, and continue to actually to iterate on learnings actually on a continuous basis to make that happen. So when that happens, obviously, initially when you actually have the tool come up with actually some of these ideas of actually so-called inconsistencies, skepticism builds in within the organization. It's like, well, this is clearly not actually not an issue of inconsistency, and people feel actually that the tool is less precise as what you would actually want to have. Because as I said, the assumption is, inherent assumption is, when you have these models, the precision should be actually to the highest extent, and that is not the case. You need to actually to have continuous assessment and making sure that the model refines as it continues to keep learning from it. And over a period of time, the precision actually improves. But that skepticism is something that we have to overcome. Second thing is the culture in the organization. As with any tool, whether it's AI, ML, or even actually a simple actually a smartphone, the very first thing actually that people's minds is like, why do I need to use this? What exactly is it? I myself in the early days, and I don't want to age myself in terms of thing, but I can tell you with over a period of time when we used to have these calendar things where we used to have Blackberries and then smartphones and all of these things, we used to actually to ask ourselves, why do we need it? What exactly is it going to actually to bring of an efficiency perspective? Today, none of us can exist without any of these things. So it takes time for people to actually to absorb and try to find ways of embracing some of these changes. These are truly, I would say, a significant change in the way that we do things. So when you have some of these, it'll take time to actually to make that happen. Obviously, you have to find ways of educating them in terms of how to actually utilize those, and then actually making sure that they understand the last thing about it is it takes time to actually to have the full utilization of that tool.
Kannan, you touched upon a couple of points I wanted to just a little bit deep dive. One is there is an organizational infrastructure perspective to make it safe, make it easy. You talked about culture, which I'd love to get your double click on that. The second part is, you said there are skeptics and people who adopt it and who don't, and ability for people to change. So talk about both dimensions. What did you do organizationally and what did individuals do? Because the outcome is fantastic. You were able to reduce the cycle time for COVID and get a lot out of it. So you got a very good goal, but what was the team dynamics of how you got this thing going?
Number one, actually, any of these problems that we are actually addressing, it does involve people actually across multiple functions. It is not actually a simple out-of-the-box digital tool that we can actually just launch. But instead, these are tailored solutions to the problem that we are actually addressing. So when it's a tailored solution, you need to have individuals across multiple functions to come together, defining the problem, and then actually trying to find ways of what would be a solution that would be considered ideal, and what would be considered as ideal when it comes to actually the very first solution that you're looking at, and how do you refine that solution as you move forward, and how many of them are planning to actually include. You can't actually just like any other solution, you can launch at the very get-go, or the very first thing actually across all of the thing. You have to find a way to pilot it, trying to find ways of ensuring that pilot actually has defined metrics that clearly actually identifies the success factor and whether the return of investment is actually clearly being met at every milestone that you actually have to measure. Because you have to have certain clear milestones where we actually have to measure these metrics and ensure that those are being met on all of those things. If not, go back to the drawing board and actually assess what exactly is the one that is a failure and how to actually go about doing it. So that's the first one. When going back to the culture piece, it's not about actually launching a technological solution. It's about actually ensuring that the organization needs to actually to be trained and have the appropriate training tools in place in order for them to actually to get used to some of those changes. And how do you actually go about making sure that those things happen? So you need to have not just the individuals who are using the tool in itself, but other stakeholders. They need to also come in together to make sure that they are all in this together, the journey together. And that actually has to happen first in order to actually to bring in this change as we move forward. And it takes time. It's not a launching of a solution and then walk away from it. Instead, you have to have that methodical actually assessment on an ongoing basis. What is similar to actually launching of any software product. You're going to actually have, when you launch for one indication or at one therapeutic area, there's likely actually another therapeutic area. It may not work exactly the same way. So you need to actually to start refining it as we move forward to make sure that those things happen. So you have to have the appetite to learn and continue to actually to absorb some of the feedback that comes from the users and continue to actually to then enhance the product as you move forward. That is a culture that basically listen, take the feedback and try to actually to then using the feedback, develop the model even better to actually to make this thing. That is an iterative process, and that helps the user to be even more friendly from a perspective of utilizing some of these tools.
I can go down multiple different paths of how do you get people trained, but maybe I know you had a couple of good use cases. You wanted to walk the journey off of it. So maybe within that journey, you could talk about the before and after. What was the state of people, process, and technology before you started these AI interventions? And then what happened in that journey? And I'm sure there were some positives and some challenges which you overcame. Would love to pick it within a use case or a case study which you would like to share with us.
Actually, the two case studies that I wanted actually to touch upon today, which is more relevant in today's world, is as we all started embracing ChatGPT and all of the other generative AI solutions. Pharma obviously woke up and actually said, "Oh my God, we have to leverage actually generative AI for automating many of the documents that we actually produce." In the drug development today, I have to actually say the complexity is mounting in terms of the timelines. They are stretching. Everybody is worried about actually how long it takes to actually develop a drug, how long it takes to actually run clinical trials, and bringing a life-changing therapy to patients is an incredibly complex, much costlier, and a long journey. And we are now we're recognizing it's a revolutionary shift, and leveraging the generative AI piece can transform how we create as well as manage the vast documentation ecosystem that actually truly underpins the drug development aspect. And I can tell you actually from an example perspective, the document challenge, our industry faces because of the fact that for a good reason, we are very much a highly regulated environment because we're talking about health sciences. So our industry faces an enormous challenge when it comes to the administrative as well as operational burden in drug development. And it's often interfering with our ability to innovate very efficiently. And for each clinical trial, the teams produce thousands of pages of documentation, starting with the protocols, statistical analysis plans, clinical study reports, safety narratives, informed consent, and patient information leaflets. And because when the drug goes out, and the same patient information leaflets, among others. There are so many of these documents. And this process in itself consumes thousands of experts' hours across multiple functions, including, I'm talking about early stages from preclinical to clinical to regulatory and medical affairs and other things. So from a typical phase 3 program, the documentation task alone could consume about 20 to 30% of our valuable resources, scientist resources, and clinicians' time. And this is more of an administrative burden that can directly extend development timelines and ultimately having a downstream impact on the delaying patient access for therapies that are much needed in many of the therapeutic areas.
This is
And
definitely
it's
a
by
big
no means,
problem.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a huge problem. And believe it or not, it's actually it's so much time consuming with all of these documents. I think it's not about ChatGPT writing a very nice email for you or Microsoft, I think Copilot writing an email for you. We're talking about actual documents that make sense from a scientific perspective. And so that's what's the problem. And the opportunity with generative AI in this case, it does present actually a very strategic inflection point here. By automating some of these and augmenting, obviously human augmentation is absolutely critical. Augmenting actually document creation and management, AI in itself can dramatically accelerate process and enhance operational efficiencies. Specifically, actually, generative AI has the potential, for example, rapidly draft initial versions of essential study documents from protocols to clinical study reports. You can also automate quality control checks and including source annotation of verification. And it also, because it reduces the goal of reducing human error, because it's an automation process, the human error actually is minimized, I think. Because you and I, for example, were to look at the same thing, you could actually be looking at one thing and I could be looking at another thing. So it reduces the concept of the human error piece. And then also it streamlines document revision management. It facilitates seamless amendments and more importantly, tailor writing styles for different audiences. Because remember, actually, we are developing these drugs for across the world submissions and approvals. And so it actually does tailor the writing styles for different audiences, enhancing readability not only for regulators, but also for patients and healthcare professionals as well.
I think you touched upon a very important part. Uh, the 20 to 30% is one part of it, which is the actual time effort. But I think you touched upon a very critical part, which is the what I call, consistency effort. Where what you write and what I write is not consistent, and you're actually trying to take the average, the mean up, but more so the median up, because you're now getting more people to write better at a higher standard. So you're bringing in the lower folks to a much more higher standard and also making it consistent. The other part which you said, which is really interesting, is changing to the different styles of output. But because usually pharma is all about templates and getting one voice, now you're saying, hey, get it to one voice, but now I can then manage that one voice into multiple different voices based on the audience, the regulators, and all of that, which is a very fascinating part of this journey. So how do you get somebody get started on it? Let's say I'm part of your team. What tools are you giving me to author? What kind of training are you giving me to get ready? How do I onboard myself into this journey? I'm sold, but how do you enable me to be part of this journey?
I think actually we have to recognize one of the things that in any business, pharma is no exception. You have to have quantifiable benefits and return of investment, because when you're investing in some of these type of technological innovations, you need to actually define the way to actually to quantify what is the benefit, why is it a benefit on the receiving end, on the stakeholder side, and what is the return of investment, and what is the time of actually that investment, return of investment. That's something that the first thing you have to actually ensure that the stakeholders have to have the buy-in for some of these things. So integrating GenAI in our R&D workflow isn't just innovative, but it has to be the power to be potentially transformational, and that's critical. And any significant reduction in document generation timelines has the potential to directly translate into efficiency and as well as accelerated development cycle timelines. And so you have to measure these metrics to show the fact that it does improve the cycle timelines. This not only leads to the time and resource savings, but also means we are able to meet unmet medical needs, actually the patients that we serve. That is going to be a critical one. And I have to say, there are three elements point of view, right? From a challenge and consideration piece. One is we have to recognize on a technical front, as I've mentioned before, remember these are based on models. So number one is ensuring from a technical front, ensuring model accuracy, because you cannot actually exaggerate. I can write a poem or for my wife actually using ChatGPT, and she's not going to be concerned about actually whether the poem is actually as accurate as what she is saying. But you're talking about in health sciences, accuracy is absolutely critical. So ensuring that your model accuracy is critical, reliability is going to be critical, and the rigorous validation is paramount. And more importantly, data privacy, security are non-negotiable. You can't actually have, because it's data privacy and security is a non-negotiable. Then there's a seamless integration with our existing document, trial, and regulatory information systems. And it's very crucial for scalability, because you can have build one solution but doesn't talk to each other in our platforms. That is not actually going to be scalable across things. So that's from a technical point of view. The second one, actually, which is a very critical one, is from a regulatory standpoint. We need to actually ensure that we engage with government regulatory authorities, building the trust, and as well as demonstrating robustness in compliance of AI assistant documentation through transparent validation and clear audit trails. And there have been clear requirements what both EMA as well as FDA had laid out actually, and also the European Union has laid out actually what are some of the things that we call good use of AI and how to actually go about doing it. That's actually the critical piece. The third, which is critical one, operationally, we have talked about much of this thing, embracing this AI driven change requires definitely a strategic organizational shift, and which means new skill development and addressing ethical considerations very proactively. And those are the three ones that I would say key challenges and consideration you have to do in order to actually to truly make it as impactful as it should be.
I totally buy into that concept. Actually, one of the case studies we talked about before was just improving communication, actually saved 20 to 30% of the effort because you're communicating clearly. But the way I wanted to ask the question is, if let's say I'm not Pfizer and I don't have this infrastructure, how do I get started in this journey? Do I first, you said ROI, absolutely. And you've laid out the thesis for the ROI. Documentation automation is going to really benefit from cycle time. So we know the ROI, but many people struggle on what is my starting point? Now that I know I have to do it, do I pick one process? Do I pick multiple processes? Do I pick a team? Where do I get started? And then walk me through maybe a couple of steps around after we start. What are all the guardrails I have to put in place to make this thing scale?
I think actually one of the key things that you don't need to develop all of these things internally. Pharma is not a technology company. So we're not the Googles or the Oracles of the thing, but certainly we recognize actually that there are solution providers that are out there. But first of all, if you were to not be a Pfizer or you any other company, the first thing you have to do is to create actually more like a challenge across all of these providers to understand how do they actually give them examples and what are some of the basic requirements that you would want to have on those and how accurate or close to accuracy that they can get. Because as you know, actually GenAI and so many of these tools do have this concept of exaggeration, and you don't want to have that in a health sciences document. So you want to actually to uncover the potential opportunities and the challenges using GenAI in this context. And so there are actually providers that actually exist, but you have to actually to pick and choose the ones that truly set a test with actually with an asset where you actually will have a certain segment of the document and see how close that they can get to that by actually having them compete to ensure with multiple other things, how close they can get to actually what the real thing is. That actually is going to be the critical one, because you don't need to actually to develop everything in-house, but you have to figure out a way to actually to also assess how do you actually go about managing this. And then the other one actually is that from I would say the future, it's important actually that internally we need to actually to start thinking about how do we actually then change people's mindset in ensuring that there is I would say a fear of AI, which unfortunately many of the individuals continue to actually to say it loud and clear in terms of they somehow feel AI will replace humans. That is not the case. AI will actually make humans more efficient. and more, we will be able to actually do things in a much more effective manner, efficient manner than what we had done in the past. So that is something that needs to actually be very loud and clear when it comes to the communication message. And how do you actually ensure that Gen AI is an augmentation of the work that we do in order for us to be even more effective? And that's something that we have to actually focus on as well.
Both are very good points. And I love the innovation challenge and competition. I think that way you can almost democratize what is the right tool for your particular situation and environment. Kind of, it's been a good journey. What are some of the headwinds you will face as you start to scale this across pharma? And what are the tailwinds we're having to maybe accelerate this journey forward?
Yeah, I think actually the headwinds I would say is that many of these Gen AI models are not actually appropriately trained in data that needs to actually to be trained in, right? So there are a lot of large language models that exist today, and many of them are actually good for very many purposes. When it comes to actually the document generation piece, many of these large language models are often trained in data sets which are pretty large compared to actually the health sciences data. So number one thing actually that I would say is that the headwinds that is that bringing some of those large language models and not necessarily developing each other thing, bringing in, but then utilizing these large language models to train in the data that you have internally and be able to actually to make that actually and train some of those large language models internally within your own sandbox, I might say, because you don't want to actually to put it out there because these data, as I mentioned, privacy is absolutely critical, confidentiality is absolutely critical. And so we need to actually ensure that it is within or your own sandbox, try to actually build these type of training models and ensuring that the data is, or the output from these models is as accurate as it should be based on actually your data that actually exists. And then I would say this is a big challenge or a headwind, and because it takes time because many of these large language models that currently exist across multiple things, they're not trained actually appropriately in the health sciences data. And we still see actually some inaccuracies in many ways. And you can't afford inaccuracy when it comes to actually these type of things. So you need to actually to make sure that that actually happens. That's the biggest challenge, I would say. And then the tailwind, actually, I would say, is that industry-wide, everybody recognizes the use of these tools that can help us in actually accelerating drug development timelines and actually making us more efficient as we move forward in creating actually these multifaceted documents and helping actually the whole drug development process. So there is a movement that comes in actually across all of the pharma companies and as well as technology companies who recognize this is an area that where tremendous opportunity exists as we move forward. So that is a tailwind that we have right now, and there are many companies that are all in the path to go together, and so there are opportunities both from collaboration across pharma, collaboration across technology companies, and trying to find ways of making sure that these models are done appropriately in order to actually be able to suit the needs that we have actually across a different framework. That's critical.
No, I mean, both very spot on. I think, pharma has always been one where they want to see success stories and then they are fast followers. And so as more and more successes come on, that's going to be a good tailwind. But as you said, the headwinds are always going to be there in terms of, context and having more of a health sciences context and making sure that it happens. As we're trying, what would be, as an expert who's gone through this journey, what would be your key takeaways for the audience around if they're going down this journey? What would you recommend they do? What is their starting point, and what should they watch out for?
As I said, the audience have to buy in the concept of actually what is considered as opportunity here, what could be as challenge. You cannot actually bury the challenge and actually say there's no challenge. It's a solution that's going to actually make things life easy. So you have to actually spell out the opportunity. You have to actually to be transparent when it comes to challenge. You also have to be transparent, as I mentioned, on the 3 legs that we talked about, the regulatory aspect, making sure that you're working with the regulators to ensure that you have a very transparent process in terms of how you actually develop this, how you validate this, what are some of the things that you are putting in place in order to have the checks and balances. And that is going to be absolutely critical. And so that it's what I would actually phrase as ways to actually to enhance these type of things. And again, we have just begun the journey in Gen AI. There's so much more opportunities using generative AI. This journey just started. There's a lot more opportunities as we move forward.
Yeah. And one last futuristic, as you said, the journey has just began. If we are in 2030, 5 years from now, what is your prediction? What would happen within drug development and clinical?
I think actually, first of all, 2030 is still a much shorter time frame, and we're still talking about within 5 year time frame what are likely to actually to happen. But I do believe actually that at least if a significant number of these documents that can be generated, automated, and be able to actually to have reduce the timeline by at least 30%, and 30% of resources, 30% of actually timeline actually thing. That in itself is a pretty good thing, because I do believe actually that helps us to actually to gain over the overall timeline perspective, because documentation is huge and when it comes to drug development. And that would be critical. By 2030, of course, there are other opportunities, significant opportunities that actually exist. In fact, actually, if I may, depending on the time, actually, I want to touch upon another good one, actually, from a case study that we are doing, which is a critical one, which is digital health technology. Again, it's in an infancy stage, and where people are trying to actually. We have seen like mobile glucose monitoring. And on an on a regular basis, monitoring your glucose, and that seems to be actually very prevalent now. Likewise, blood pressure monitoring, heart rate monitoring, things of that nature. But there are digital health technologies and wearable sensors also offers huge transformative opportunities in clinical development, because the burden on the patients when it comes to actually the participating in clinical trials, as well as post actually approval when the patients are on any of these treatments. It is actually to going to take the time off to be able to go to a clinical site and actually assess are they actually okay, or whether a patient actually who has cancer, to actually to see whether the likelihood of relapse of the disease or any of those type of things. So this helps actually they enable more of a remote assessment and monitoring of this, and also from a clinical trial perspective, remote participation from these patients. And the wearable sensors, again, supported by artificial intelligence and machine learning, is, as I said, is very much in the infancy stage. It's only going to take off. By 2030, I predict actually that there's going to be a great opportunity to be able to actually to measure a significant amount of information, clinical trial endpoints, measured through some of these devices. That makes a huge impact overall from a patient-centric development. Because right now, if you look at our clinical trials, many of them are not patient-centric, and patient-centric development and patient-centric monitoring post actually marketing is also going to be a critical one.
No, I mean, those are fantastic use cases, and more the FDA and other regulatory agencies are asking you to create what they call clinical endpoints rather than observational endpoints. And I think that itself is a huge topic to talk about, because many of the early digital health were very observational endpoints, which the FDA thought it was too much noise. But as with AI and others, you can actually make these things clinical endpoints, and then clinical endpoints can be incorporated as biomarkers or disease progression things, which you can then help from a regulatory submission standpoint. So
yeah. And the challenges are there. And I think actually we have to develop robust evidence to validate some of these digital endpoints from a regulatory approval perspective. I think the classic one actually when the Apple Watch actually was measuring the heart rate, the question became as like, do you then go in and assess the hardware, or do you actually assess the output from the Apple Watch thing? And so all of these were regulatory questions that were asked, and then is now approved, as you know. It is time consuming and it is costly. By no means these are cheap. It takes time to actually do things, but standardizing some of these endpoint definitions across sponsors helps you to actually to go forward in a more rapid manner, and also broader adoption as well.
absolutely, these give almost two big holy grails of what people can look for. One is operational efficiency you talked about, which is the document process, which is huge and humongous for us in clinical trials. And then really looking at the future and thinking about how do you look at endpoints and clinical endpoints and take
Yep.
it on.
I want actually to close with some key takeaways, though, right? And I just do feel that it's important actually when it comes to the best practices for AI adoption. I do believe actually that while ensuring compliance and all applicable laws and regulations, you have to actually to find a way to align people, process, and technology, and that's critical. And also from a people perspective, this involves upskilling teams, fostering cross-functional collaboration, cultivating a culture ready for AI-driven change. That's going to be critical. Process-wise, you have to have the best practice, including automating high-burden documentation tasks, embedding quality control, audit trails, integrating actually these technology tools like AI into document workflows. On the technology front, it is critical to validate appropriately these tools, integrate them with the existing systems, and then, of course, invest in scalable infrastructure. And that's going to be critical, whether it's wearables or digital tools. Together, these practices enable very much a faster and more efficient development while maintaining regulatory rigor and patient focus.
Kannan, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you providing all these different insights, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, Sri, what did you think?
Danny, that was a great podcast. Kannan talked about two very relevant use cases. One for here and now on how do you save 20 to 30% of the time in clinical trials by automating the documentation process. And in clinical trials, documentation is the bane of every function and every role. And bringing in AI to streamline and reduce that effort is fantastic. The second one was much more looking at digital health technologies. And then again, how do you bring in AI to build the future clinical endpoints, which can make sure that you're taking care of patients remotely and monitoring them, but also collecting data from a digital endpoint standpoint, which you could then use it for regulatory submissions.
Yeah, with that regard, he talked about some related issues like the problem with large language models and the need for them to be appropriately trained to the health sciences. This is a point I've seen raised elsewhere. What can companies do to address this?
I think in large language models, the critical part is what's called context. And the more context you give, the more better that those models are from a hallucination standpoint. So what Kannan said is if you train these large language models more and more on the healthcare context, you're going to make sure that they're performing much more better, hallucinating less, and become much more accurate and appropriate for adoption.
He also talked about the need for quantifiable benefits and being able to show return on investment. How challenging is it to measure what's a small part of a very complex process? And are there key metrics companies will use?
As Kannan said, ROI is a very important parameter and a metrics to measure. And for that, as he said, there is a before and after state. What is happening with the process currently in terms of time, effort, and cost? And then what happens after you implement the AI from a time, effort, and cost? What Kannan said is it's a journey. It's not an instant switch. You implement AI and immediately you get the benefits. He said as the AI model learns more from the interactions and as the humans learn from using the AI models, the ROI becomes much more clear. But the clear part of many of the ROI is can we save time? Can we save effort? Can we save cost in doing each of these things? It's also the journey. It's not a switch. It's a journey to get to that endpoint success.
You also talked about culture and adoption and this not just being about the need for buy-in from the people who are actually using these tools, but from others as well as assessment. He also talked about the fear that exists that this technology could replace humans and the need to communicate that this is an augmentation to allow people to perform better. To what extent do you think this inhibits the successful or rapid integration of the technology?
I think he gave us a right framework. There's two parts to the success. One is organization and second is the individual. As an organization, as he said, you have to clear and create clear metrics, create a culture of adoption, make sure that it's safe for people to try it out, as well as having metrics to measure. That's an organizational. From a human and individual perspective, it is the fear to try, giving them the ability and the tools to try it and make their lives better, and articulating the value from their standpoint and how it's more augmentation than replacement. So I think he gave us a little bit of a good playbook around organizational structure as well as individual things which one can do to make adoption happen.
Well, it was a great conversation, and I'm so glad we were able to have Kannan on the show. Sri, thanks as always.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Agilisium Labs. Life Sciences DNA is a bi-monthly podcast produced by the Levine Media Group with production support from Fullview Media. Be sure to follow us on your preferred podcast platform. Music for this podcast is provided courtesy of the Jonah Levine Collective. We'd love to hear from you. Pop us a note at danny@levinemediagroup.com. For Life Sciences DNA, I'm Daniel Levine. Thanks for joining us.